What's going on, everybody? My name is Alonso, and today we're going to be discussing what is arguably the most dangerous piece of gear you can use on any slackline rig ever: the soft release. Now, I say this is the most dangerous piece of gear kind of ironically, because when you use this piece correctly, it's actually one of the strongest pieces in your entire slackline setup. Seriously, this thing is pretty much indestructible once you've got it set up properly. However, the user error associated with this piece of gear has been absolutely ridiculous, so much so that I'm making an entire video strictly about soft releases and how to tie them properly, because I think it's really important that we don't mess this up. And just for fun, I want to tell you guys a little story. I was recently at GGBY, and one thing I realized is big festivals like that no longer use soft releases in their systems at all. And the only real reason for that is because of how easy it is to have a mainline failure when these are used incorrectly. So without further ado, let's go over the soft release, how to tie it, and how to properly use it. But before we go ahead and do that, if you're enjoying my videos, if you're enjoying the content I put out, go ahead down below, hit that like and subscribe button for the algorithm and all that. Yeah. Oh, you might have just ripped my puppy. If not for me, do it for the dog. Anyway, let's get back to the video and let's start talking about soft releases. Before we move forward on how to properly tie a soft release, let's talk about what a soft release is and what it does, as well as how it works. So a soft release is essentially exactly what it sounds like. It releases softly. So when you've got tension built into your webbing and you need to de-rig your line, the very first thing you have to do is release all your tension from that line, and that's what this piece of equipment is for. So the way a soft release works, it's simply a piece of webbing that's wrapped around itself over and over and over again, and you undo those wraps to release the friction. The more wraps you have, the more friction you get, and the less wraps you have, the less friction you get. And literally the only thing this does is it's supposed to stay in your system the entire time. Ideally, it shouldn't shift or move, and it releases tension. So let's talk about anatomy. A soft release is, as we said, literally a piece of webbing, and I'll state it again, this is the Slack House one. I've had this for quite a while. You can see it's a little bit sun faded in some areas, but still super bomber. It's made up of two shackles. One goes to the anchor, one goes to your webbing. And ideally, although not necessary, you should have an extra carabiner so you can clip the tail off when you're all done tying your soft release. I am not picky at all with what soft release I use, so long as it is long enough. Ideally, you could use any rated piece of webbing. It's really nice if it's got a sewn end like this. Now, I like a really long soft release because I like to rig really tight freestyle lines that usually have a lot of tension built into them. A long soft release is also really nice if you are rigging really big long lines in the park, because when you long line as opposed to high lining, you typically have a lot more tension in a line. In fact, last week I had over 10 kilonewtons on one of my long lines in the park, and that was only about 150 meters long. I would never crank that much tension onto one of my high lines. Now let's go over how to actually tie a soft release and how to use it on an anchor like this one here. So we're gonna start with our piece of webbing and just one of those shackles. We're gonna take that sewn loop end of our soft release and one of our shackles. We're gonna take the pin off the shackle, and I'm just gonna stick this in my pocket for now. Make sure you don't drop this if you're out highlining. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to put the shackle through that loop, just like so. Then I'll take my finger. I use my pinky because I don't have an index finger, but you probably use your index finger, and just let it dangle like this. You can see I've got the shackle dangling and then the piece of webbing like this. Then I could simply take this piece of webbing and start wrapping it around my finger and that shackle in a really efficient way. This is especially nice if you've got a really long soft release like this one, and it would take a really long time to pass the end through two shackles. So I like to typically do 5 to 7 wraps. Now I count my 5 on one side only, so if I'm counting, so right here I've got 7 strands total. That doesn't mean I have 7 wraps. This is actually 3 wraps. I like to do between 5 to 7. So that's 4, 5, and we're gonna go to 7 because we have a ton of tail left, and why not? 6, 7. So that is 7 reps right there. And you can count 7 strands on each side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So moving forward, it's really important that you have no twists in your soft release and that the webbing is laying flat on top of itself the entire way through. When you have a twist, you lose a lot of friction because the webbing is not making full contact with itself anymore. That's actually how web locks can fail. We'll discuss that in other videos. But make sure it's flat. This is the first step. Now we can go ahead and connect it to our anchor here. We'll take our anchor, and remember, we have the shackle through the sewn loop right now. We're going to put that shackle on the anchor like this. And then we're just going to put that pin back on the shackle, being careful not to let go of the rest of the soft release so that it doesn't get twisted. So take that pin out of my pocket, put it in here, just like that. Make sure it's nice and tight. So then the next part, we want to take our second shackle and we want to put it through the front here. Slide it on through. Now, important side note here, you don't want too many wraps because then it's difficult to get a shackle on here. You can see this is a 1/2 inch shackle, and with 7 wraps, it fits very snugly on there, just enough. I think if I put more than 7 wraps, this would be kind of a difficult process to do. And we're not done yet. I have a couple of rules of thumb when it comes to soft releases. The very first one, and I'll explain why in just a minute, is to actually flip this back shackle so that the pin is resting inside the sewn loop. So I'm gonna do that real quick and then I'll explain why I do that. Now both pins are facing forward, as you can see here. And the reason I flip this back shackle, we usually use some sort of anchor on bolts like a BFK or something where if this pin was on the anchor, this shackle would technically be tri-loaded, because let's remember shackle anatomy for a little bit. Shackles are meant to be linearly loaded on the pin, and then you can tri-load them on the bow. So if you've got a lot of anchor material here, or if you don't have a linear pull, you have to use it this way. Now granted, with a single strand of a span set, I could have left this shackle the way it was and it would have been just fine. But as a rule of thumb, I like to have both of my pins facing forward, and I just wanted you to know why. Now, on the front pin, this one is more important even. The reason I want this front pin facing forward like so and not flipped like this is because if I have it like this, while technically I'm loading this shackle properly and there's no problem with that, the pin is now in an area where there's going to be webbing going around it at a really high friction. I have seen these pins come unscrewed when the webbing gets de-rigged. Heck, I've seen these pins come undone while the webbing is still rigged and somebody's playing on the line. It's a really, really, really scary thing, and it can be avoided by simply flipping this shackle like so that there's no pins spinning in here. So just a couple of things to think about when rigging a soft release, but if you want to get it correct 100% of the time, just remember that the sewn loop side always goes on the anchor and both pins always face forward. If you do this, there's really almost nothing you can do wrong. I can't think of anything right now, but I don't want to say that there's absolutely nothing because I'm sure one of you guys might think of something that might be wrong, like, I don't know. So now that that's out of the way, let's go over how to properly tie off a soft release. So we want to do a mule overhand. So what that means is we're going to take a loop of webbing like this, and you can see that I made a kind of downstairs spiral here, meaning that the tail is underneath the initial part of the webbing like so. I'm then going to put this right under the soft release like this, and I'm going to take this side here and I'm going to put a bite around and through this loop like so. And you'll notice you'll get this really pretty shape like that. And then we just want to pull this real nice and tight like so. And the next step, this is the mule overhand. The next step, we just want to do a bunch of overhands. They're kind of like half hitches, and they're just going to add a little bit more friction to our tie-offs. So to do that, we take the same bite, go underneath the whole soft release again, and then go through the bite. So I'm gonna go through this hole right here. And then we're gonna pull those tight. We're gonna keep doing that till we have very little bite left. And I'm pretty happy with that. So we've got this bite left. Now, we'll wanna use that last carabiner we had. Now this doesn't even have to be a locking carabiner, but all we wanna do with this is take this tail, clip it, and just clip it off to something. It can be pretty much anywhere. You can clip it here, you can clip it here, you can clip it to your anchor. If your tail's really long, you can clip it to a bolt. It really doesn't matter. Just clip it off to something so that there's no way that this can come undone. I like to clip it off here personally, so that's what I'm gonna do. We've finished playing on our slackline, and now it's time to release our soft release. Now, believe it or not, this is not as simple as you might think. There's actually a really good technique to doing this properly, and I see this one done improperly a lot of the time as well. So first things first, let's undo our backup and our tail tie off. So that's simple, and if you did enough wraps, it shouldn't blast off and release without your consent. Here's where I see the biggest mistake. So I'll see people take the webbing and just start to undo the soft release like this. And the reason why this can be problematic is because you can have some sort of pinch point in here where all the friction is being held in these inner strands. Like you can see, I can actually tear apart the top ones, but these middle two are really tight. So nothing's gonna happen until you get to that point where it just all kind of explodes before you know it. And this is especially problematic on high lines where you've got a tag line attached here, where you can really shock load your tag line, and you don't want to do that. So the way that I like to release soft releases, and this is especially, as I've said, this is especially important for really high tension lines, is you take your hand on the top here like this to just grab all the top strands, and you take your other hand and you put it on the bottom. And I'm gonna grab the top half of the soft release with this hand and the bottom half with this hand, and then I just kind of scoot it like this. And you see how it does it really nicely. It doesn't create these ugly unwanted slack points like if you were just to try to pull on one side, that might happen. But if you use both your hands in this kind of alternating motion, you'll see that my line's already almost de-rigged. Granted, this was a low tension line just for an example, but this also works on a really high tension line as well, and it's the smoothest, easiest way to release. And as you do that and you get closer to the end of your tail, then you can undo one wrap and rinse and repeat. But anyway, that is the proper way to release a soft release. If you enjoyed this video or if you learned something new, don't forget, as always, down below, hit that like button for the YouTube algorithm, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out whenever I post, and hit that little notification bell so you're notified just a little bit more every single time I post. I'm currently posting every 2 weeks, so don't want to miss those. As always, love you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be safe out there. I'll see you guys on the next video.